Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to Alta Journal's California Book Club. It's a thrill to be here tonight for Manuel Muñoz and the Consequences with special guest Talia Lakshmi Kolluri and, of course, our host John Freeman, who is working the night shift from London. My name is Blaise Zuriga. I'm Alta Journal's editorial director. We've got a big crowd tonight, so I encourage everyone to please reach out, say hello to each other, where you're zooming in from, greet one another, pass along some kindness. And while you do that, I'm going to cover some housekeeping. Tonight's event, as I said, is part of the California Book Club. It's Alta's free monthly gathering celebrating books that help form a definitive guide to understanding life in the Golden State. Tonight is our 51st episode. We've been doing this since October 2020. That's 4.5 years. It's just going strong, and we're so delighted that so many people keep coming back. So I think you're really in for a treat tonight. In the weeks leading up to each club meeting, altaonline.com, we publish several essays about that author's work. We've got pieces by host John Freeman, editors Anita Felicelli, David Hewlin, critics Heather Scott Partington, Ursula Villamarie Mora. Just amazing. It's a trove of great stuff, and you'll find all about it if you sign up for the free weekly newsletter, California Book Club. It's at altaonline.com. There's other newsletters you can sign up for. Trust me, they're all great. And tonight's program will be recorded. People always ask that. It'll be available on our site. You can come back and watch it. And tonight would not be possible without the amazing support of our partners, the LA Public Library, San Francisco Public Library, Huntington USC Institute on California and the West, Book Passage, Book Soup, we love our indies, Camino Books, Vromans, Books Inc., Green Apple Books, Bookshop West Portal, as well as Narrative Magazine and Ziziva. Please support our partners. Visit their site, go to their store or your local shop and pick up a copy of Manuel's book or any book. You already have one? Give it to a friend. And you too can support our work here at Alta Journal by becoming a member. Just visit altaonline.com. Tonight for the California Book Club, we have a special discount. It's 25% off our usual all-access subscription. You get our big, beautiful, award-winning quarterly. This issue features a special pull-out folio by Rick Bass. We've got the 7 Wonders of California. And of course, we've got an amazing essay and portrait of tonight's guest, Manuel Muñoz. And it's Why I Write. So you can pick this up at a local bookstore or on the website as well. It's free shipping, no tax. You'll get it pronto. Trust me. You can't tell the players without a program. And if you sign up, you'll also get a special book that we put together. It's the Altitude Cartoon Collection, which is on the back page of every issue. They're really good. The first 5 years. And there's also one more discount tonight too for the California Book Club tote bag, the world famous tote bag. It's 25% off. All this information will be in the chat, and we'll send you an email after tonight's event as well. And if paper's not your thing, we do have digital memberships, $3 a month. So please check us out. We'd really, really appreciate your support. And that's it. So I'm really excited for tonight. I hope you are too. So sit down, buckle up. It's going to be a great evening. Let me please turn this over to John Freeman. John.
Thank you, Blaise. Hello, everybody. Hello, everyone in the chat. Nice to see people from Ellsworth, Michigan, Stockton, particularly relevant because tonight we have, I think, probably the living great poet laureate of the Central Valley, Manuel Muñoz, to talk about his latest collection of short stories, The Consequences. It's his third collection. It's the collection that I think preceded his MacArthur Genius Grant win. I think in the future, when people want to know how life was lived in the Central Valley, they will turn to his books. Zigzagger, The Consequences, of course, What You See in the Dark, which is his noir novel, and The Faith Healer of Olive Avenue, which is a collection of stories kind of like Winesburg, Ohio, all linked together, as well as The Consequences is too. And earlier today, I was talking to a friend who's a big reader of short stories. And I always know that when someone has connected as a writer of short stories, that you can mention a title and then you can mutually tell the story back to each other, which is exactly what happened with the first story in this book, The Consequences. It's called Anyone Can Do It. And this friend and I just sat there and told the story back to each other, reliving how beautiful it was and how painful, and how much the story winds us up to believe that something might give this character grace. I think one of the great skills that Manuel Munoz has is that he sees people, he listens to them. And that sounds like a strange thing. It makes it sound like short stories are a bit of anthropology, and they're not. But I think because he gives so much dignity and credit to his characters and views them with a kind of God's eye view in which their actions are not worthy of shame, but rather they're things that they do because they want basic life. They want to love. They want to have loyalty from their family. They want to work. They want a roof over their house. They want to go out on Friday night. And around these very basic desires, he builds stories of immense emotional texture that are so exquisitely written. And that also describe this triangle between Mexico, Texas, and California, the triangle in which many of the migrant workers that basically feed a great part of this country work and travel in and live a life that he knows a little bit about because his parents were Mexican-American farm workers. He too worked in some of the harvests growing up, went to Harvard, got an MFA from Cornell, wrote these 4 books that are now, I think, a testament to the skill and exquisite attention to detail that he puts on the page. He's won a Whiting, 3 O. Henry Awards, he's been in the Best American for one of the stories in this book, the aforementioned MacArthur, the Joyce Carol Oates Award, and I hope many, many more, because we need more writers like Manuel. But the very fact of his existence is extraordinary because there are not that many Chekhovs produced. Tonight we have one of them. Please join us in welcoming Manuel Munoz.
Hi, John. How are you? And welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I appreciate not only all the places that are being represented in the chat, but listening to that introduction, John. My goodness.
Yeah, I was going to say that you're, I think, the one of the 3 best living American short story writers, and then I thought, okay, then that becomes like a kind of boxing match. But I want to start with the short story as a form. I know you get this question a lot, but when you were growing up and you were beginning to read and like books, did you have this inkling that the short form was for you, or was it something that came over time?
Oh, it's definitely something that came over time. I talk about my MFA experience quite a bit, which was a good one, but I was in a cohort of some really powerhouse writers when I came in. There were just 4 of us. We're all about the same age, in our mid-20s, but they had already started publishing. And I guess I just retreated. I didn't want to be in competition with them. So I declared myself a novelist and worked on a novel during the MFA. I was also a very quiet student. You could not get a word out of me. But what was happening was during these very intense conversations that grad students could have, of course, at that level, I never really chimed in, but I was creating my answers. So in some way, I was training myself to become a story writer by not participating and being a little afraid of taking sides. When the MFA was over, and I taught the story a lot. I was sitting at College Town Bagels in Ithaca,
I
and I
know it
knew,
well.
yeah, I wasn't going to be showing this to anybody. And I started writing something, and it came as a story, and I knew it's like, oh, I think I can do this. Whereas the novel took me a long time to realize that's really not my preferred form.
Did you feel very far from home? I'm a Californian too. I took a semester in Ithaca and would go to that bagel shop, and I felt like I was on the moon. And can you tell us a little bit about Danuba, where you're from, growing up, and leaving that place and going to the East Coast for school? I know there are lots of layers to that journey, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but what do you like to say about it now that seems relevant?
Well, my entire family still lives there, so I see it a lot. In fact, I'm debating. I shouldn't say this aloud. My sister might be on here. She'll be. It'll become a guarantee that I'm coming home. But I'm thinking about coming home in March. I visit quite a bit, and so I'm always coming back to the place and the feelings that I had when I was very young and very confused. I was not out until about my mid-20s. So it always becomes a time for me to go back to questions that have brewed a long time. And it's sometimes easy for me to imagine a character and they will sit around and float in my mind for a long time. And then when I make my next visit, I'll start to picture them in, what Dinuba looks like now. It's very different from when I grew up. It's still a small town. It's about 25 or 30,000 people, but when I go back now, people think of it as a pretty big. It's too much traffic and the stores are crowded, and it's not really that. It wasn't that way when I grew up, but all of the elements of neighbors knowing your story, families knowing the rings of how they're all connected. I can tap into that really easily, and I'm very grateful that I get to see that and have connection to it.
Did you go to church, to the same church there?
Oh, yes and no. I mean, I grew up. I don't want to say that I grew up in a religious household, but I grew up in a household that was led by a person who had very strong moral bearings, and that's my grandmother. She was a Jehovah's Witness, and I went to church with her for a little while, stopped going, and then I went to a Pentecostal church for a little while when I was sixth, seventh grade with friends. It's the kind of town where it's very easy to step into a religious community just with different denominations. So, whether it's Catholic, Pentecostal, the Lutherans, like everyone has a big presence. And it informs how people behave around each other. So about the time I was 14 or 15, I was asking tough questions and I wasn't satisfied with some of the answers, so I stopped going to all of them.
I ask about that because certain values of Catholicism taken in the abstract, like caritas, you know, grace, etc., they emanate from these stories, not in any kind of programmatic way, but it's like everyone is living in a world in which there is a God. It's not a Joy Williams world where there's if God is there, then God has decided he doesn't like us very much.
Mhm.
Whereas I feel like faith for some of your characters is something that's of importance. And this isn't to say that their moral questions are driven by faith, but they are certainly informed by it. And I wonder, there, how do you write those kind of stories today, given the varieties of worlds that your characters move through without, I don't know, predetermining how they will act?
I have to say that I deeply appreciate this question. Um, and I say that because sometimes throughout my career, I know I'm new to a lot of people, but I've been writing for 20 years. And I think a lot of my stories have always been involved in some way or another with trying to do the right thing. We want to call that moral, that'll be the phrase. But I I really like the juxtaposition that can be set up when one knows that there's a particular path along making choices, but needing to make the choice that is right for oneself. Um, the Faith Healer of Olive Avenue, just going back to the book from 2007, it was supposed to be titled When You Come Into Your Kingdom, which is a title of one of the stories. And I wasn't allowed to have that title by my editor at the time, which I resented a little bit because I thought that that to me was the core of so many of the stories. It's a redemptive moment. Again, I don't go to church. I'm not particularly religious, but I'm very moved by some of the stories that came across my upbringing. And for those who don't know, that phrase comes from the moment when at the crucifixion, when Christ is on either side, there are two others who are being crucified with him. And one of them says to him, if you really are who you say you are, essentially, can this be my moment of redemption? Will you remember me? And he says, yes, I'll remember you. Will you remember me when you come into your kingdom? And he says, yes, I will. And I'm tremendously moved by that, because that is, just to take it out of that context, I think about how often I come across characters who are looking to be forgiven for a choice they have made, that at the moment that they made it seemed to be the only one that they could make.
I love that. Sorry, keep going.
Well, yeah, I mean, it informs, how I see characters move around in the world. Even as you just said, they're not often really right apparent, but that's some of the tentacles are still there for me.
Well, and what's lovely about this book, somewhat like The Faith Healer of Olive Avenue, is that you see people twice, several times, and you see them in one moment, and then you see them in another. Teddy appears in one story as this sort of comet who passes through the life of Mark. And they're a couple. They're living in Fresno. They meet together in LA, and then Teddy gets sick and has to go back home. And you have this moment where Mark has to decide whether or not to just cut ties. He tests negative. He doesn't. He thinks, well, maybe I should just stop there. But he goes home and follows where he went to and sees his funeral. And then you see this whole other side of Teddy's life when you get his sister's story. And I think one of the geniuses of this book is its ability to show us characters from one or two different angles, sometimes within the same story, but sometimes across stories. And that often happens in these moments of, as you say, they're seeking atonement for something, but there are also these marvelous collisions, sort of juxtaposed worlds. And I was wondering if you could read a little bit from one of the stories early in the book, Presumido, because there's one of those amazing moments of collision where, you can set it up as you wish, but the characters could connect.
Sure. I'll read a little bit from Presumido, and this is a story. I don't want to say it almost didn't go in the book. It was going to be in the book, but I didn't realize how people would react to it, because it was a story of upward mobility. It's a story of two gay men who have bought a house, and it's a story about their relationship. And I just thought, well, it's how connected is all of this to the stories of the Valley. And of course, I can send this to my agent. He'd say, well, read the story and you'll answer your own question. So this is a moment where they're about to have a housewarming party. And Juan, who's the main character, has finally agreed reluctantly. And the woman who comes over to help them out arrives. And Juan is confronted with what to do with that. From Presumido. His father had once said to Juan that he wished to live by himself, now that Juan's mother had left him, but he just couldn't say no to his sons. As Juan brought in more boxes, he thought of his father peering into the empty rooms, longing for a space of his very own, maybe. It had been, Juan realized, more than a few months since he had visited his father, but the move would tie up the rest of the week, and the weekend was approaching. On the weekends, they visited friends that Daryl had made, Bobby and Fred, Greg and Charlie, a wide circle of couples. All of the men seemed content, paired up and comfortable in the havens they had created for themselves, and none showing any of the itch to run off to Los Angeles or San Francisco, never to return again. That was the feeling Juan got when he went along to those backyard barbecues. Something more than the impeccable green bushes was keeping out the rest of the world. Bobby and Fred lived on the north side of Fresno, which was noticeably becoming the rich side of town. Not just old and white, but rich. Their backyard had a pool. Their friends sat around on expensive lawn furniture, plenty of seats for everyone. It was a long way from the poverty of scalped yellow grass and dirt driveways, the houses that both he and Daryl had grown up in. Some of the men at these gatherings may have been familiar with windows tilting in their frames from crumbling foundations, but they gave nothing away. Every weekend, it seemed more and more of them showed up. But once they revealed the small towns where they had once lived, Orange Cove, Cutler, Ivanhoe, Traver, Juan would never hear them speak of those places again. That weekend, when Daryl and Juan arrived at the party, the news about their house spread. Bobby handed out white wine in real glasses. Someone had turned up the radio, a station with Evelyn Champagne King singing Love Come Down, loud enough for dancing, but not enough to bother the neighbors. The chatter buzzed light and funny, and the congratulations clearly pleased Daryl, who liked being the center of attention. He was a showy person, Juan knew, an only child. His mother doted on him, something Juan thought about when Daryl sought his affection. Bobby was asking about a housewarming party, but Juan held his tongue. Severina does a great job, he caught Bobby saying to Daryl. The plan was already in motion. She was the only woman Juan had ever seen at these parties, the one who had prepared some of the food and brought it out in hot trays to the backyard, cheerful when the men complimented her cooking, but never lingering among them. She always went quickly back inside, and Juan, usually into a third or fourth drink by then, would sometimes glimpse her through the kitchen window. The woman had caught him looking one time and stopped what she was doing for the moment. Her look of hard dissatisfaction dissolved when she had locked eyes with him, and Juan had seized up at the way that she had looked back, as if she might have been somebody he recognized or who recognized him. Juan would have called that shame, but it was more complicated than that. Something closer to the old feelings he used to have when, out to the movies with Daryl on their first dates, they had exited the theater and made their way back to the car. In those early days, it was easy to call it fear or threat, but if Juan had to be harsh with himself, he felt those stares as judgment. He thought he was long past judgment. A woman named Severina looking at him, men from Kerman and Sanger and Terabella not speaking of those places anymore.
Oh, I love this story so much because it's so loaded with the past in a way. And that moment in the story when you realize that Juan doesn't want to have the party because he doesn't want to be possibly judged. And yet, so that even though they're upwardly mobile, everyone in this book is sort of fearing a little bit of judgment in a way. And I feel like one of the things the stories continuously gives us is to give us their complete character and also give them the characters a reprieve from judgment and shame by allowing them to be their their complete selves. And in your first book, you have this line that really kind of destroys me. In one story, where the character says, "And though he needs an extra $5, he wants a beer." And I think the accordion of want and need in this book is so beautifully made, and there's a money cost to everything in this book. A lot of it has to do with earning enough money, paying for things, how much things cost, and how much work it takes to get them, and what the cost of that work is, and what you leave behind. And I guess I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you write about that collision between work and expectation, and if there have been any writers who showed you the way that could be done, people on whose shoulders you stand. Someone asked the question, Peter Reel, that would be an inspiration in that regard.
Well, I know I should name a writer, but I have to name my mom. gosh, just naming her is it wells me up a little bit. She's a great storyteller. And when I think about the question between want and need, and again, going back to my experiences growing up, I mean, I'm a child of poverty. Everything, all of my choices come back to that, and how I value money, how I value access, how I value um, access to, just to anything where you not having the stress of how to pay a bill is a huge relief. And I look out now for my siblings in that same regard, where I just don't want them to have that pain anymore. I'm always able to refract how the ways in which we can relieve ourselves, be happy, be content, satisfy, provide a need, whether it's for other people or private, really does come down sometimes to a mere $5 bill. And it's I don't know, I don't want to call it instinct, but that's the way that I refract things, is how can you get the thing that can make you happy? I think about that phrase a lot. Money doesn't buy you happiness, and I thought that's ridiculous. It can absolutely, it can provide relief for sure. And just the weight of not having debt, or having, as in that first story, how, what am I going to do if my working partner has been deported, and the immediacy of how to take care of the here and now is right at the door.
Let's talk about that, because it's obviously we're in this, Biden deported more people than Trump, but now Trump is, I think, reaching a whole new level of insanity, sending people unmonitored to concentration camps, essentially. And your stories, several of them exist in the consequences of deportations or roundups. The first story you just mentioned, anyone can do it. A woman is moved to a town. Her husband has been deported or rounded up, and she doesn't know where he is, doesn't know when he's coming back. She's kind of running low on money, and her neighbor says, hey, maybe we should do something. I could really use a car. And the main character has a car, and she has to decide whether to trust her. And so it seems like one of the things that your stories look at in the wedge of consequences created by deportations is how hard the circumstances press down on things like trust. And what does that do dramatically for how to tell the story? Obviously the situation is horrific, but the storytelling impulse must come out of how to turn this new reality into something that fits within 17 pages.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, most people who come from my community, this is nothing new. I mean, or people who are my age certainly recognize it. It's just that this time it's militarized. That's really the only difference. But we recognize the instability, and I think a lot of us have maybe what others don't have yet, which is, that step to make the leap of imagination, take a radical leap of imagination to do more than think about somebody apprehended on a street corner. I was just talking about this with some students at UC Santa Barbara a couple of weeks ago. Look, these would be the images that we'll be seeing. But one of the things that it can test in all of us is do we have the capacity within ourselves to say, can I picture the family that is being affected by that person who is taken out of their workplace? And it's not going to be a cookie cutter, mom, dad with 2.5 kids. There are all sorts of situations that demand our attention. It can be, say, for example, like in this story or in the second story, 2 people who aren't married. So what does it take for somebody who's not married, that doesn't have any legal reason to go down and try to bring their loved one back from the border? What drives them? Or it can be, a U.S. born grandfather who has an undocumented granddaughter who serves as his translator. And now that family unit, it's just the two of them, has been broken. That's the kind of challenge that I think people are going to have to undertake to think about what it means as we're starting to watch those images. I think sometimes media will let us leave it at just the apprehension and the deportation. And that's it. But there's more to it. There's always more to it than that. I've known it. I knew it in my bones. It's just that what has come with age for me, as my parents have started to tell me those stories from those times before the '86 Immigration Act helped my father stay here, is how they came back, how they came together time and time and time again, and the resources that it would take and the people that they met along the way. And sometimes it's just a person in passing that exists for them as nothing more than a story told 40 years later. But with age and being able to listen to them, I start to realize, I'm not the center of the story. I always thought of those stories as, my 12-year-old self, my 14-year-old self being very, sad about my dad not being there. And now I'm looking back at it as, geez, this is my mom and dad in their early 40s and, loving each other intensely. Another layer, it's like, it's my stepfather. In some ways, to be crass, they're not even his own kids. And here he is, doing his best to make sure to come back to the backbreaking work it would take to support kids that really weren't even his own. I'm completely moved by all of that. And what does that do in terms of sparking my own imagination about, the empathy it creates for people out there in their own situations? So in some ways, there's just a deep well of stories that come from that situation, which unfortunately, there are going to be more of them coming. But that's what we'll be seeing.
The story that Manuel glancingly referenced is the second in the book, The Happiest Girl in the USA. And it takes place largely on a bus going south towards Los Angeles, where as the bus goes further south, more and more women get on the bus who are clearly all going to try to find their loved ones, partners, husbands. And the main character sits down, and another woman gets on who's very young, is dressed a little bit too nice for such an errand, and probably doesn't know what she's in for. And here's the moral question immediately comes up quite early: does she help her? Does she help? And I love the way your stories deliver the moral question pretty early, because it allows it to kind of escalate across the whole length of the story. And I'm aware of time moving on, and I have a lot of questions for you, but I know Talia Lakshmi Kolluri has some as well. She's a short story writer herself, and so has been in the engineering room as well. What We Fed to the Mantiore, her first book, was up for the Northern California Book Award, and many others. She's extremely talented, and she has a fistful of questions to ask you. I'm going to pass it to her for a few rounds here, and I'll come back in a little bit.
Hello. I am so excited to be talking to you. Oh my gosh. And thank you for that beautiful reading that you gave earlier. I love that story. I actually really love that you and John ended your conversation, or this phase of the conversation, talking about the happiest girl in the whole USA, because that's actually the first story I read from this collection. One of the things I love about short fiction is the ability to read them out of order.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my favorite features. And I started with this story because my husband actually teaches high school in Selma, California. And I read it and I was like, you need to teach this. You need to teach this whole book, particularly this story, to your students. And I want to talk a little bit actually about place-based writing and why this collection is so special to me. For listeners at home, I actually live in Fresno, California, and I have been here since 2007. And one of the things about the Central Valley and Fresno in particular is that it feels to me sort of unlike any other place in California. It has a very almost indescribably unique character. And one of the things that was so moving to me was to feel like reading this collection, I was very much immersed in the Valley. I mean, there's the obvious shout outs to places like Kingsburg and Reedley and Selma and streets like Shaw Avenue. These are places I go all the time. But the part that I thought was the most fun, sort of inside baseball, was the fog. I don't know. I don't know how many people are familiar with Thule fog and like how terrifying it is. But this sort of, it had this wonderful effect for me in reading it where I couldn't articulate how it happened, but I felt enveloped by the place, and also by the time in which these are set, because many of these stories are set sort of in the 80s period of Fresno, and it really is an atmospheric collection. And I know you don't live here full time anymore, so I wanted to talk to you first about what is your feeling about writing from a place to which you don't have an immediate present relationship. You visit, you come frequently, but did you feel that you needed to leave in order to write about the Valley with the most accuracy?
No, I didn't. And as I said earlier, because I go back so frequently, maybe I'm cheating a little bit because I'm in touch with it
Yeah.
so often. You know, but I have to say, Talia, one of the reasons that I had hoped that you would be the host is I discovered your writing. I think we were on a short list or long list together. And when I discovered that you lived in the Valley, I immediately went to look out for your book.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, I think I posted about it on Instagram. If that, I think that's we have not actually met for
I
those of
know,
you who
this
are
is the
listening
first
to
time
this.
we're meeting.
But you know, we're mutual admirers.
Yeah.
You know, and to a certain degree, I can almost toss the question, you know, right back to you because some of your stories that feature animals and are told through the point of view of animals take place. I don't want to call them otherworldly, but sometimes it's in the middle of a vast ocean, you know. So whatever it is that we have to access as writers to put our imaginations at work, I know that for myself, I go back to the things that haunt me quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say any chance I get to mention the fog, I'll bring it in. But for those of us who know the valley and who, you know, and know how that fog sort of seeps in onto the landscape and then maybe even on really cold days into your very bones, it's worth describing, and it's an extraordinary sensory experience. So I think the landscape has that capacity.
It does, and I think something that maybe people who haven't spent a lot of time in the Valley don't realize is how dramatic the landscape is. And I sense that so much in your work, particularly this collection where, and it's actually the one that I'm thinking of is Field Work, where the father is describing all of his work that he's done over his life, all of the farm labor, and he's been at the base of the Sierras picking crops, which I think to me is such a striking image in the sense that you can have this dramatic mountain range, probably the most dramatic mountain range on the West Coast. And
Mhm.
it's astonishing and it makes you feel so small. And yet his everyday life is pressed up right against that. And um, that starkness, I think, was just very striking to me. And I loved it so much. I also kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about how you conceptualized your character's relationship to the places, because to me, so much of this collection was not just about the experience of being in a place, but also the desire to both return to and leave, and these sort of stretching tethers. I felt so many of your characters had a longing for where they were living while they were in it because they weren't quite ready to stay.
Yeah, it might be, it's maybe me seeping through the pages, and just showing how much I love the place and honoring in some ways how timeless it is. I think those of us who know the valley well enough, or actually anybody in the chat who comes from a small town,
Yeah.
where I wouldn't say time stands still, but time takes a long time. Change doesn't come as quickly sometimes as we would like it to, I think can appreciate what it means to revisit a place long after something has really happened, but we can see the place has not changed at all. And I say that because I think it struck me when I went to the East Coast and lived in New York and Boston and was watching a city change really rapidly and how people adapted to that. And the contrast to me was immediate because I could go back to Dinuba, and the TG&Y dime store was in business for quite a while, and I could go in there and go back 30 years instantly if I needed to. That's starting to change, of course,
Yeah.
but and even the landscape itself, where it's being given over to developers or the crops have changed in some ways. But the memory of the land and how to immerse oneself in it, I think that temptation's always there.
Yeah. I really felt like so many of your characters were in these liminal spaces too. And I think that um that just a sense of longing permeated so many of these pieces. And I was kind of I've been asking myself, how do you create that kind of im I don't want to say imprecise emotional texture, but that feeling where you you can't quite articulate what it is that you want. I'm thinking actually in particular of Mark, and his relationship to Teddy, and how it's it felt to me like they, or at least Mark told himself, that they didn't know each other very well. And yet when he finds that Teddy has died, he drives all the way to Texas with this desire to be close to someone that he doesn't really even know. And yet there's this pull. And and you wonder if it's Teddy that he longed for, or something about himself. But I felt this longing was permeating every piece, and I wanted to know, how did it feel to you to write this kind of emotional texture? What was that like?
I'm going to have to ask you the same thing, or to inform the audience here. When they pick up your collection, I think they're going to find the same thing. And I guess maybe the way to answer that is, and I'm certainly not speaking for you, but um, I think we share some stories that kind of go against the rules maybe that
Yeah.
we knew in creative writing. I always feared being called sentimental. I always feared being called too emotional, or that things could generate a really huge emotional response. But at the same time, I found that to be a huge contradiction, because I thought those are the stories that moved me so much, where you
Oh,
have to
yeah.
put the book down. The Good Donkey, this first story in your book, does the same thing. My students read that in the 404. And one of them said to me, are all of the stories going to be this heartbreaking? I said, well, we'll find out.
Did you get that same reaction to your collection? Because I basically cried my way through this. I really did. And I think that this is the thing that I struggle to articulate, that I feel very deeply, is that I want to be sad. Like I want the permission to feel untethered. That's the word I'm looking for, actually.
Yeah.
When I think about all of your characters, so many of them are untethered in a way that's not uneasy. It's like a hungry sort of being untethered. And I wanted that. I wanted to feel just sort of loosely attached. And I did cry my way through.
Well, it's sort of like, learning that word in lit, catharsis.
Mm.
And it just kind of goes over your head. It's just like, oh, okay, that's just something to pay attention to. But then when one becomes a practitioner and you start to realize that there's real power in either letting a reader or even in our own responses to a play or a film or a piece of music, where we're letting something release. It's okay to reach for things like that, and I really gravitate towards stories that push us into emotional edge. It doesn't always have to be sadness. It can be rage. It can be intense happiness, and it can come in other forms. Like this, Ross Gay has a collection catalog. I'm going to forget the name. It's beyond right at the tip of my tongue. But I remember when I closed that book of poems, I just thought to myself, that's the most radiantly joyful book I've read in a long time. And it's still, and it wasn't an empty kind of happiness. It was just a way to think about the world of new and gratitude. So, so that's where it comes from. I think it's just, thinking of ways in responding to other writers and seeing what they're up to. And when I came across your book, and we write so differently, but I was quite glued and very moved by your beautiful collection. I'm
Oh,
so
thank you
grateful
so
that I
much.
have a chance to chat with you.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and I honestly was very glued. I have been just so excited to talk to you that I'm pretty like just flustered basically. I I think one of the things that I think just really hit me so deeply was how how easy it was to see my own life reflected in so many different places in ways that were surprising to me. I think I returned to this story fieldwork repeatedly because I think a lot about how the narrator is struggling with this idea of his father aging and at the end of his life. And I'm in a phase of my life where a lot of us we have aging parents, some of us have lost parents, and it's just this just really tender and anguished experience of not knowing how to be in that position and not knowing um, how to be a caretaker and not knowing if you want to be a caretaker,
Mhm.
and then feeling guilty about um, how you feel about that situation. And I just thought that was such a visceral feeling that came through in that piece. I wish I want everyone to read this particular story because we all reach this phase of life, but there were so many moments in this collection that felt so strongly that way, where I could sense this emotional relationship between me and the characters. Just everything felt so familiar, and I just thank you so much for writing it.
Oh,
Yeah, I can't say enough how much I love it. Um, I also kind of was thinking a little bit about, oh, where are my notes? I have so many notes. I want to ask you a little bit of, oh, am I running out of time?
No, we're
Um,
just gonna have a three-way conversation the rest of the way
oh,
because your
great.
questions are great. And
it's
don't
like
don't
John approaching us at the bar with drinks in hand.
yes, I'm here. Keep
Okay,
talking.
so I have one last question, which is, well, maybe not last for now. I really, really loved how you zoomed in and out of perspectives. You would go from like the individual to the collective. And the two that stand out to me the most are, I'm going to pull the Presumido, which I thought was one of the things I loved about that was you start with Juan talking about his life and his relationship to Daryl, and he's another liminal space character where he's living a life that he's not all the way in. But then you pull into this group where everyone is talking about all of the places where they're from, and then they never mention them again. And collectively, they have this clear desire to be from somewhere else now. And you did this again in the pink house at the end of the street and on the other side of town, all the men who live on the porch, working and living at the house at Holdo's house. And they have this collective experience of watching Poldo just completely lose it on his family, and they have this collective experience of feeling maybe they should have intervened, or maybe there was this one time where they behaved the same way. And I'm just so interested in that technique of the ability to zoom in and out that way so seamlessly. And was that easy for you? How did your craft process work for something like that?
I think it comes from personal experience, because I was thinking about this um, when I was reading John's beautiful essay that came out a day or two ago on the Alta website. And he mentioned that passage with Severina and described the character as he doesn't know what to do, so he does both.
Yeah.
And that's essentially my experience in life. You know, it's again coming out relatively late, not late, but 22, 23 years old. What I was doing was always navigating a space with how do I approach something? How do I be part of something without being known for who I am? But in that time, I really wasn't aware that I was also training myself to be a narrator of a certain kind. I think that's
Yeah.
where it comes from. I'm just always very aware that so much of my life had been guided by trying to hide, but that forced me to develop an eye for how you behave. And sometimes, trying to straddle so many different worlds is the product of that. And so maybe that's probably one reason why, one, I do it, I don't want to say easily, but I do it often, because I sometimes flip it a little bit and think maybe everybody goes through this. Maybe it wasn't just me, regardless of where they are. But I think that's part of it is, again, the effects of age and coming back and realizing what being in the closet really, really meant for me in terms of developing my eye and my ear and my heart.
Do you feel that you're an instinctive writer in any way?
Yes, I'm going
Yeah,
to say
me
that
too.
because I tell my students this all the time. I'm the advisor to 3 grad students right now. And I love being able to, when we come across a really great passage in the draft and we're talking about how it's working, I bring up that word a lot. It's like I say, hey, I've been watching this pattern trace over your draft so much, and it's just this instinct that you have to move, your character around, or you start in this particular place, or you go philosophical. They all have different talents. We all have different ways of seeing the world. So it's got to be instinct, I would say.
Yeah, I
There's
love that.
there's a question that's come up that I want to circle back to that relates to something that Talia talked about, which was atmosphere, the fog. There's a lot of compliments in the comment queue about Maria Wortham says it reveals so much. I never knew, even having taught farm worker kids in Fresno and Monterey counties, how real it was. Thank you so much for this book. But the atmosphere that the book creates is very palpable, and it kind of can shade towards noir. And your novel, What You See in the Dark, is a kind of noir um, novel. It's a kind of thriller, I guess, too. And there are moments in these stories where they touch genre a little bit. Like Susto is a kind of not a grotesque. It's almost a horror story. And Susan
Mhm.
Sanford in the audience says, I'm embarrassed to admit I didn't get the ending of Susto. Is Manuel willing to explain a little bit? And I figured you have the author. Let's hear what.
Oh boy, should I? Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'll say this, or maybe I'll just direct in a particular way. What I really was going for in that ending was the inexplicability of what happens when you can think in another language. Because that's part of it, is that the voice is commanding him in one way and he's hearing it. I mean, Spanish is coming out. And I like that idea of a kind of possession. It's true. I mean, I don't write stories like that, but I read a whole lot of stories, and I'm also, I come from a culture where we tell a lot of stories about ghosts and devils and whatnot. And I remember when I was writing this, I said to my agent, I don't really know what I'm doing with the story. I said, I don't write stories like this. And he said, your very first story in Zigzagger features the devil. So I think, that's kind of, maybe you should keep pursuing what this is. It's, yeah, there's a little air of mystery about what that ending is. I don't want to call it a possession of any kind, but it's a connection, I think, to loneliness and being overpowered by something on the other side that could be a solace for this man who is very much alone and doesn't have any kind of community, no one who understands him. And certainly that's the kind of, projection he's been making on the man that was found. It's like he's nobody, and he had to be corrected. It's like, actually, we know he was. He had his own history, and the young woman in the restaurant in the diner doesn't really say, we all loved him, but that's the implication. We know our neighbors. We care about them, and if you bother to ask, we'll tell you who they are. But that man doesn't really have anybody. So maybe that's as far as I'll go. Is that okay?
You did an amazing job of not spoiling the ending. Well done.
I loved that story. Oh, it was haunting.
Yeah.
There's some questions that maybe both of you could address, because they're sort of about sort of craft of writing short stories. And one of them had to do with basically how where a story is going once you get it going. Like there is that moment where it sort of takes off and it has some momentum. And then how do you figure out what to do with the middle 2/5, essentially, to get you to the point where the ending kind of, brings you home? Do you want to talk about that, Talia, Manuel?
Well, I'm very deliberate. I'm a very, very deliberate writer. I just won't get started. I don't want to say that I know the entire story going through. The only one that I can say that is the case for in the consequences is the very last story. That story almost came out in one fell swoop.
Oh, wow.
I was really happy that it came fast.
Isn't that so satisfying?
It really is. And I think it's sometimes when one is listening to a character, when a character, I won't spoil how it's connected, but when a character starts to speak on their own and they were already sort of in existence, it became quite easy for me to find what they needed to say and what the story was. But in other cases, I won't go to the page until I'm fairly sure that I've gone past the 2/5 spot that you're talking about, John. And yeah, true. Maybe it removes a little bit of the surprise that can happen if you just sort of let yourself go. But I've never been a writer that has felt a whole lot of liberty to, kind of mess around. I feel like I have to be really deliberate. I've always felt that way. So I really take my time.
I usually know the ending when I start.
Mhm.
I know where I want to end up. Sometimes I know the beginning too.
Yeah, I usually know the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I once read some interviews with Eudora Welty where she basically said that she wrote most of her stories in one sitting. And I thought,
Oh, that's amazing.
that's amazing, and maybe student writers should never read that.
Well, I mean, I have to say, I tell my students, look, every book has had its own character. Faith Healer, I was in a really, really tough personal situation, which now seems completely ludicrous. It was over an ex who had dumped me. But
Oh,
it was in a spiral and feeling really, really bad. And I was essentially taking it out on the stories, but it was putting me on a schedule where I could write one in about a month. I could revise it in about a month. And I finished Faith Healer in about 2 years. It was very quick for me. But I remember my agent at the time, when he'd gotten at the time, my agent said, he's still my agent, but he said to me about the fourth one, he said, whatever mood you're in, stay in it. Because it was producing this work that was, that I could later sit down and sort of just think through with what the stories were doing. So every time in our own lives is shaping how we create. So right now I'm being very deliberate, very careful. So
I just want to read some comments to you from Jesus Francisca Sierra, who said, the universal themes in this collection resonated with my immigrant experience. It accomplished what I think all writing should do, that is to have the reader embody the character's experience as their own.
yeah.
Jane Hall says, thank you, Manuel Muñoz. Your voice is a tremendous one, especially for those of us with roots in to Fresno and the Valley. Judy McKinley says, agree, same for me. There's just a lot of love for this book in the audience. Thank you so much for being so generous with us tonight, with your heart and your stories of your life and experience working on this book, and Talia, for coming to ask these really brilliant questions and to shine your own intelligence onto the landscape of this book and the decisions that made it. It's really made for a lovely discussion that Jose Vadi says thank you. Wonderful writers in the audience today, including some there's I think one of your sisters was here, said love you.
I'm sure.
If my brother came, you'd say I'm disappointed in you.
Oh, I just wanted to note Judy McKinley mentioned Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. That is the book of poems by Ross Gay. And the University of Arizona Poetry Center has an archive of many readings there. And I would encourage anybody, just go look at any of them. But Ross Gay really gave a joyous reading when he visited us when that book came out. Really beautiful.
I just want to add one thing about the consequences. If you haven't read it, it's out. Please go get it. Your early collection, Zigzagger, someone took my faith healer. Are they being re-released soon?
Yes, actually, one of the great things about the MacArthur was that it brought all this renewed attention, when I was out on the road with Consequences, I got people coming up to me and saying, wow, Grey Wolf is doing such a great job on this debut collection. It was kind of hilarious to me. I was like, I've been around for 20 years, but thanks anyway. But yeah, I mean, those two books had essentially gone out of print. Been very quiet about it. But I was really happy when the attention to the backlist produced with this interest with Northwestern. So Northwestern is going to reissue Zigzagger with a foreword by Elena Maria Viramontes, who was my mentor at Cornell and who was a previous book club participant. And Faith Healer will be reissued by the Chicana writer and activist Cheri Moraga. And What You See in the Dark by Charles Taylor, who's a film critic and who just happened to spot the book coming out of the train station one day and wrote something, and we found it. And I just wasn't getting a whole lot of coverage, and wrote this beautiful essay. And so it's the forward to the book now. So those will come out in June, and you can find them on Bookshop or bookshop.org or Barnes and Noble. Maybe not that other place. I won't mention them, but you can find them on pre-order there. Yeah, and look for the ones that have the forwards with Elena and Cheri and Charles.
That's really great to hear. Maybe Alta can have an Alta Live for those books when they come back out. I still remember talking to you during the pandemic with was it with Sandra and George Saunders?
Yeah. That was a wallflower moment for me, because I thought, what am I doing in this room? It was right during the pandemic, and it was for the anthology, for the short story anthology that you had put out. So.
Yeah, that was this book club started during the pandemic, and we're still going almost 5 years later. And it's also really nice to meet new writers. Manuel, you and I have worked together, but Talia, it's such a revelation to read your stories, and I hope we get to meet again soon.
Of course, and thank you so much, Manuel, for including me. And I promise next time I talk to you, I'll be much cooler.
Well, let's hope we run into each other. I would really want to see you in person. So maybe at AWP if you're going down there.
Yes, I will be there. Yes.
Then we'll seek each other out. I'll see you very soon.
Alta will be there too.
Oh, nice. Well, I'll stop by the booth.
Stop by and say hello. Yes.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Well,
I sort of barged on here. I'm sorry.
Blaze is going to walk us out. Tell us what to do now.
I want to say, just thank you so much. Thank you so much, Manuel and Talia and John. What a just great evening. Just big thank you. Thank you to everybody for logging on. chiming in. 814 people registered for tonight's event. Huge.
Yeah.
Everyone will receive a thank you note in tomorrow's email with links to all the cool things, links to books, all that. Everything was discussed tonight. Please be sure to join us next month, March 20th. We will host Rita Bullwinkle for Headshot. And one last appeal for your support, please. If special offer, discount, 25% off our regular $50 price. You get the 4 issues plus this amazing cartoon collection. There's also a special offer for the CBC tote bag. This is the best bag I've been carrying mine around for 5 years. It's just indestructible. It's just great. And of course, if you go to altaonline.com and check out other merch, show your love for California, wear it on your head, on your sleeve, whatever. So that's it. And finally, I'll sign off, and there'll be a 1-minute survey that'll pop up. We'd really appreciate your feedback. Tell us what we can do better, what you like, and so on. So stay safe, and please return next month. We'll see you in March. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.